Dejut Falcha, welcome back. Well, I must say that last video has quite a history already. It's been up 3 seconds. It took me 3 times longer to upload it than it did to actually record it. Well, no, to create it. I got all creative. I did music, I did pictures from album covers, and then I went to YouTube jail. I had no idea. I didn't know that you couldn't do that. I've seen lots of other YouTube channels that play music in the background. I don't know how they do it. I don't have time to worry about it right now. And there are so many YouTube channels that present the music that I played. So I didn't know. So that'll teach me to be creative. And of course, it was a real struggle because I don't know how to do the technology. So it was all done by hand. Oh my God. So then I tried to trim it off, and the beginning of part 1 is very rough, and I apologize. So much for creativity. So let's move ahead with our book. This is part 2 of Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon by David Mcgowan. And we finished talking about the military intelligence operatives who spawned Stephen Sills and John Phillips and who was the other guy? I can't even remember now. But now we're on David Crosby. David Crosby has quite the reputation with these people who lived with him. He was a founding member of the Byrds, a founding member of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, the son of an Annapolis graduate and a World War II military intelligence officer, Major Floyd Delafield Crosby. His father was in Haiti in 1927 while Haiti was under U.S. military occupation. His father worked with Captain Phillips of John Phillips fame. Crosby is David Van Cortlandt Crosby. He's the scion of the intertwined Van Cortlandt, Van Schuler, and Van Rensselaer families, who were powerful, wealthy, founding Dutch families 225 years ago. They were the Dutch colonists who started New York. His family tree is unbelievable. I guess it's so long I actually left it in the book to read to you. Okay, so suffice it to say that the Crosby family tree includes a truly dizzying array of U.S. senators and congressmen, state senators and assemblymen, governors, mayors, judges, Supreme Court judges, Revolutionary and Civil War generals, signers of the Declaration of Independence, and members of the Continental Congress. And then it goes on to talk about he's a direct descendant of the Founding Fathers, the Federalist Papers authors Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. If there is, as many believe, a network of elite families that has shaped national and world events for a very long time, then it is probably safe to say that David Crosby is a bloodline member of that clan. If America had royalty, then David Crosby would probably be a duke or a prince or something similar. But other than that, he's just a normal run-of-the-mill kind of guy who just happened to shine as one of Laurel Canyon's brightest stars, and who, I guess I should add, has a real fondness for guns, especially handguns, which he has maintained a sizable collection of for his entire life. According to those closest to him, it's a rare occasion when Mr. Crosby is not packing heat. John Phillips also owned and sometimes carried handguns. And according to Crosby himself, he has on at least one occasion discharged a firearm in anger at another human being, all of which made him, of course, an obvious choice for the flower children to rally around. There's a little bit of sarcasm. Jackson Browne. His dad was career military. He was assigned to post-war reconstruction in Germany, and he was in the OSS, which is the precursor for the CIA. It has been revealed that that sort of work basically was involved in maintaining Nazi infrastructure and shielding war criminals so that they could pick their brains for the space program. Browne was born in a military hospital in Heidelberg. He was associated with, friends with, Jerry Buckley, Dan Peake, and Dewey Burnell. These three guys were in the band America, which wrote Ventura Highway, Horse with No Name, and Tin Man, all big hits. All three of them are also from military intelligence families. Buckley's dad was the commander of U.S. Air Force Base West Ruislip in England. The base was deep into military intelligence operations, and the other two guys in America, their dads worked with his dad in military intelligence. Mike Nesmith of the Monkees was in the U.S. Air Force before he was in the Monkees, and he inherited $25 million. Where did he inherit his money? His mother invented whiteout. Just the strangest story. She was a secretary, and she was a terrible typist. And she invented whiteout in her kitchen and became a millionaire. Corey Wells, who was instrumental, pardon the pun, in forming Three Dog Night, came to Laurel Canyon directly from the Air Force. Graham Parsons of the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers was the son of Major Cecil Coondog Connor II, a bomber pilot. Now, it stands to reason that most of these guys, their parents would have been involved in the military because their parents were the World War II generation, but they were concentrated. None of them did KP. None of them was a medic. None of them was a grunt. I'm bringing out all of my military knowledge right now. They were all in military intelligence. So he was, Graham Parsons was, his father was the heir on his mother's side to the Snively fortune, the wealthiest family in Winter Haven, Florida, that owned a third of the citrus groves in the entire state of Florida. Graham Parsons was rich. He was the not the only one who was rich. Most of the famous Laurel Canyon artists were children of military intelligence, and many of them, a preponderance of them, had fortunes or they were child actors, like Brandon DeWilde, Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees, and Van Dyne Parks, all of them child actors. Some were mentally unwell. In fact, many of them had dissociative disorders that were later diagnosed. James Taylor spent time in institutions in Massachusetts. Larry Fisher, Mad Dog, attacked his mother with a knife. He was institutionalized. And many were the offspring of organized crime. Warren Zevon was the son of Stumpy Zevon, who was a lieutenant for the Cohen mafia group associates. All these people suddenly congregated in Laurel Canyon in LA, where there was no music scene, no music industry. The center of music was New York City, Nashville, and Memphis. LA was movies. There was no music whatsoever until suddenly, boom, they all showed up in Laurel Canyon. It is interesting. Let's call it synchronicity if you don't want to get into conspiracies. But I thought the conspiracies were kind of fun for Halloween. 1966, Neil Young, he was quoted as saying, "We were just like lemmings." Chapter 2, Power to the People. Do you call this a counterculture? So everyone there, this is a quotation, everyone there had at one time or another been into Satanism or, like myself, had dabbled around the edges for sexual kicks. This is a direct quote from Sammy Davis Jr., referring to the victims of the Tate murders on Cielo Drive. These people became spokesmen for the disaffected youth. The unprecedented mass appeal gave them a voice in the public and in government affairs that was also unprecedented. Overwhelmingly, they were the scions of wealthy, powerful military intelligence families, and so were their wives, and so were their managers, and often their producers. Are we to believe that the only musical talent in the era was almost exclusively from families of naval admirals, chemical warfare engineers, and Air Force intelligence officers? The author asks. Or were they the only ones singled out, signed, and aggressively promoted? Now that sounds possible, because don't forget Motown, you know. Were they rebelling against their families? And if so, why did they never actually speak out about it? They did in the music, sort of, although a lot of that music was misrepresented, and we'll get to that. But they never actually came out and said, hey, you know, my dad's a warmonger. Morrison never denounced his father's role in escalating Vietnam. Zappa never talked about the horrors of chemical warfare that his father helped invent. The Mamas and the Papas never mentioned their military backgrounds at all. The claims that this was a spontaneous, organic response against the Vietnam War and the social conditions in the U.S. are questionable. Others claim what began as a legitimate movement was co-opted by intelligence operations like COINTELPRO. And I think that's highly likely, a little less conspiratorial. Maybe it wasn't all made out of whole cloth, but maybe they saw the opportunity and grabbed onto it. What if these kids were part of the intelligence community themselves? What if the entire youth culture was not the grassroots challenge to the status quo it purported to be? What if it was a cynical exercise to discredit and marginalize the anti-war movement and create a false opposition that could be led astray? Now that's an interesting thought. What if the alleged harassment of them that happened, you know, arrests and that sort of thing, was political theater for street cred? And you will find that a lot of those arrests went absolutely nowhere. If it had been an average person, they'd have served prison time, and they didn't. Hippies and the flower children are equated with the anti-war movement. Dirty long hair, nomadic, drug taking, they were conflated with the anti-war movement to discredit the legitimate professors, academics, and concerned students, scientists, and intelligentsia who actually did oppose the war. The first anti-war teach-in was at the University of Michigan in March of 1965, before the Laurel Canyon scene. The first March on Washington was a couple of weeks later. There were no hippies. If you look at the photographs, it was priests and guys who looked like engineers from NASA and girls in Barbie bubble hairdos and miniskirts. I mean, no hippies. The left looked down on the hippies. Peter Coyote, remember Peter Coyote? I believe he belonged to a commune and changed his name. He wasn't actually born with the last name Mr. Coyote. Let's see here, Peter Coyote. He narrated a documentary called Hippies on the History Channel, and I think that's based on a book. It's a beautiful book. I actually have it. Who added that some on the left even theorized that the hippies were the end result of a plot. Now, this is coming from anti-war activists on the left, that it was a plot, the hippie movement, by the CIA to neutralize the anti-war movement with LSD, turning potential protesters into self-absorbed navel-gazers. And exasperated, Abby Hoffman once described the scene as he remembered it thusly. There were all these activists, you know, Berkeley radicals, white Panthers, all trying to stop the war and change things for the better. Then we got flooded with these flower children who were into drugs and sex. Where the hell did the hippies come from? They came from Laurel Canyon. So, Jerry Brown, remember Jerry Brown? My husband and I used to joke, you know, he was practically engaged to Linda Ronstadt, and we used to say, wouldn't it be cool, you know, if they got married on the White House lawn, they could have a concert. Everybody could come to their wedding. So Jerry Brown was a longtime resident of Laurel Canyon, just down the street from, he lived just down the street from Wonderland Avenue murders, which were big murders at the time. The Cielo Drive murders, Sharon Tate, had deep connections to Laurel Canyon. All of the people involved, they were all interconnected. Abigail Folger and Wojtek Frykowski lived together across the street from Mama Cass, where shady drug dealers were often wandering in and out of both places. Interesting little tidbit, Frykowski's son was stabbed to death in June 6th of 1999. Isn't that weird? Jay Sebring, killed at Sharon Tate's, had a hair salon at the mouth of Laurel Canyon, and he was Jim Morrison's hair guy. John Phillips invested in his business. Sharon Tate was a frequent visitor to Phillips, Cass, Abigail Folger, and they were often at her house. Denny Doherty and John Phillips were invited the night of the Manson murders, but they never made it. They got sidetracked. And Chuck Negron of Three Dog Night had arranged to go over there to do a drug deal, and he fell asleep. He passed out and he missed it. Bobby Beausoleil, one of the Manson guys, lived in Laurel Canyon and was intimately involved with these bands. Tex Watson lived on Wonderland Avenue. He owned a wig shop. He was a wig artist on Benedict Canyon right across, and he lived in Laurel Canyon. Sebring did wigs in Laurel Canyon and lived in Benedict Canyon. So interesting. Sebring lived on Easton Drive in Jean Harlow and Paul Byrne's old house. Jean Harlow got married to Paul Byrne when she was 21, and 2 months after the wedding, Byrne was found dead in his bedroom, their bedroom, with a bullet in his head. It was never explained. The butler discovered the body and called MGM security, and Louis B. Mayer and Ervik Thalberg went over there and tidied up. Then they called the LAPD several hours later. It was written off as a suicide. Harlow was never questioned. Byrne's other wife fled town and was found belly up in the Sacramento River shortly thereafter. 2 other suicides and an accidental drowning occurred in the same house. Different people, different groups of renters or owners. In or out at the mouth, in Laurel Canyon itself or around the mouth of Laurel Canyon, Diane Linkletter, Art Linkletter's daughter, Lenny Bruce, the comedian, Sal Mineo, the actor, Inger Stevens, what was she, the farmer's wife? I can't remember. She was an actress, a blonde. And Ramon Navarro, a famous silent film star, all died in their homes in Laurel Canyon between 66 and 76. Nobody knows. As some of them are written off as suicides, but all of them are mysterious. Mineo was stabbed right outside in the alley behind his house. Nobody knows. Navarro was killed by 2 pickups the evening before Halloween. Inger Stevens died on Walpurgisnacht, and she died by flying through a decorative glass screen. Very odd way to commit suicide. Art Linkletter's daughter, Diane, born on Halloween Day, just by the way, plunged 6 stories from in a hotel room. But she wasn't alone. She was with a guy called Edward Durston, who 15 years later was in Mexico with Carol Wayne when she drowned in less than a foot of water. Well, you can drown in your shower if you open your mouth and the water hits the back of your throat and you have a pharyngeal response. You have a laryngospasm and your throat will close. So 1 drop of water can do it. So the fact that it was only a foot doesn't make it necessarily a suspicious drowning, but for a non-intoxicated, non-comatose adult to drown in a foot of water is very unusual. 2 weeks before Diane Linkletter's death, Linkletter's son-in-law was shot with a bullet to the head in his backyard. All these weird things. Rumor has it that Lenny Bruce was murdered. Now, that's not like a big weird conspiracy. It's very likely that he was murdered. Frank Zappa got control of all of Lenny Bruce's material. Phil Spector had a group of studio musicians called the Wrecking Crew. Now, I'm sorry to tell you this, you guys. Forgive me. Don't shoot the messenger. Phil Spector's backup studio musicians, the Wrecking Crew, actually played most of the recordings of the Beach Boys, the Monkees, and the Mamas and the Papas. They really weren't that good. Now, the Mamas and the Papas had beautiful voices, and the Beach Boys were inspired songwriters, but as musicians, no. So they had these studio musicians from Phil Spector. Let me tell you a little personal story about Phil Spector. Now, I'm going to try to make this neutral so I don't get in trouble again with YouTube. Somebody very close to me had a job when young as a private limousine driver, and he drove Phil Spector's limousine. And he said he was crazy. I don't think this is a secret. I don't think I'm denigrating anybody. I think it's pretty well known. He said it was scary that he would be told to sit in the limo at the foot of the driveway on the outside of the gate, and Spector would go up to the house alone, and it was all dark and creepy and spooky, like Bleak House, you know. Okay, chapter 13, called Dig. the Laurel Canyon death list, and he goes through all these people who died in strange situations. So keep in mind what Denise said about the age 27, that there's what is it, a Pluto return? I don't know. I'm so bad at astrology, but there's a moment in everyone's lives that recurs on a cyclical basis, and at each of those moments throughout your life, very significant things can happen, and including which you can possibly die. And one of those time periods is around the age of 27. I always say 25 is the worst year of everybody's life that I've ever known, but 27 is the significant year here. Okay, this is a quotation. I was taken aback. I thought, oh, I don't remember writing this. This is a quotation from Graham Nash. He's talking about Charles Manson. And it's, quote, I mean, fuck, he auditioned for Neil Young, for fuck's sake. He did more than that. You'll be blown away. Graham Parsons, he formed the International Submarine Band, the Byrds, and the Flying Burrito Brothers, and died September 19th, 1973, at Joshua Tree in California at the age of 26. 2 months before his house had burned to the ground. His body was stolen from LAX, the airport, by the Burrito Brothers manager, Phil Kaufman. He took it back to Joshua Tree and ritually burned it on the autumnal equinox. Kaufman was a close prison buddy of Manson, and after he and Manson were released, they reunited in Laurel Canyon. Christmas of 1958, Parsons' dad shot himself in the head. In 1959, less than a year later, his mother remarried. 6 years later, his mother died suddenly after a visit from the stepfather. She had been not feeling very well and was put in the hospital, and he went to visit her, and she died suddenly, the implication being he had something to do with it. He immediately married the stepdaughter of their teenage babysitter. No, I'm sorry, I read that backwards. He immediately married his teenage babysitter, the babysitter of his stepdaughter. So, let me repeat it because I fouled it up. Graham Parsons' dad died by suicide. His mother remarried less than a year later to a guy called Mr. Parsons. And 6 years later, his mother died under mysterious circumstances. And almost immediately, his stepfather, Mr. Parsons, married the babysitter of Parsons' little sister. Parsons went to Harvard soon after his mother died, but he quit to form a band. He went to Laurel Canyon, and we'll see what happened after that. His sister died tragically at the age of 40 in a boat accident. Mama Cass died at the age of 32 in London at the home of Harry Nilsson, who also died. She died July 24th, 1974. Nilsson was a big drinking buddy of John Lennon. 4 years later, in the same room, in the same flat where Mama Cass died, Keith Moon died at the age of the same age, 32, September 7th, 1978. Amy Gosage, Graham Nash's girlfriend, was murdered in her home February 13th, 1975, at 20 years old, stabbed 50 times and bludgeoned. Her brother was accused, but all of the family and friends denied that was what happened. It has never really been solved. He was framed for it, they think. Tim Buckley, the singer-songwriter, OD'd at 28 years old on June 29th, 1975. He was from Washington, D.C., the son of an unstable, violent World War II hero. Jeff Buckley, his son, drowned at the age of 30 in May of 97. Phyllis Major Brown, the wife of Jackson Brown, OD'd, they believe it was suicide, at the age of 30 in 1976. Jimi Hendrix lived in a mansion just north of Frank Zappa. He died in London at the age of 27 in 1970. He was in the U.S. Army 101st Airborne, and he left under questionable circumstances. When he died, his girlfriend called not the police, not the coroner, not the doctor, not 911. She called Eric Burden of the Animals, who lived in Laurel Canyon. In 1973, his manager, Michael Jeffrey, died in a midair crash. He had bragged that about his organized crime connections and the fact that he worked for the CIA, and shortly thereafter his plane blew up. Jim Morrison lived behind Laurel Canyon's country store, and he died in Paris in 1971 at the age of 27. The same day his dad gave the decommissioning speech for the Tonkin incident boat. Janice Joplin died of an OD at the age of 27 in 1970 at the Landmark Hotel 1 mile east of Laurel Canyon, and she had been given a hot shot, like too much heroin, I guess. Here's an interesting tidbit. Janice Joplin once dated William Bennett. The Book of Morals, that William Bennett. Chapter 4, Related Lives and Related Deaths. And from a quote by Jim Morrison, "No one here gets out alive." Judy Lynn Sill, born in Studio City, California, near Laurel Canyon, October 7th, 1944. She was a singer and a songwriter, compared favorably to Joni Mitchell, Judy Collins, and Carole King. You can look her up. She had a beautiful voice, and her songs were really, really lyrical and interesting poetry, for sure. Her dad, Milford Sill, worked for Paramount Studios as a cameraman, moved to Oakland and opened a bar, and imported rare animals. He spent a lot of time in Central America importing rare animals, and he died when she was 7 or 8. The family returned to Southern California from Oakland. Her brother took over the rare animal business and died in Central America. Her mother married a guy called Ken, who used to be a Hanna-Barbera animator. He was a violent drunk. Judy ran away and lived with an older guy and did armed robberies in San Fernando Valley. This is this girl who was a singer, engaged in armed robbery and was sent to reform school because she was underage. She became a heroin addict and dealt drugs. In 1965, her mother died, and Judy went into a downward spiral of drugs and crime and landed in jail. Eventually, she got out of jail and she settled in Laurel Canyon. She sold a song to the Turtles, Lady O, and the lead on that song was Howard Kalin, the cousin of Frank Zappa's manager, Herb Cohen. He recorded the song, she played the guitar. The next year, she was signed to David Geffen's very first album label, The Asylum. She was the first one to be signed to it. Her album there was the very first release that he had, and the first song was called Jesus Was a Crossmaker. It was produced by Graham Nash, and she opened for Graham Nash on tour. Her second and third albums didn't sell very well, and she went downhill and disappeared from the scene. She was found dead from a cocaine overdose in 1979, and FYI, she was really into tarot cards. Phil Ochs. Phil Ochs was hanged in April the 9th, 1976 in his sister's home in New York. He was very politically active. His first band was the Singing Socialist. He was born in El Paso in December 19th, 1940. His father was a doctor for the Army who was sent overseas in 1943, and when he returned 2 years later, he had to be institutionalized for 2 years. He came home, his family said, like a phantom, and he was never the same again. In 1956, Phil was sent to military school, and he found his friend hanged. He went to Ohio State University, and while at Ohio State University, so in his late teens, early 20s, he had plastic surgery to alter his appearance. Now, this wasn't a nose job. This was intentionally to alter his appearance, and there remains a big mystery about that. In 1962, months before he graduated, he dropped out to pursue music, and by 1966, he had released 3 albums. In 67, he went to LA because he had been in New York. He went to LA with his brother Michael as his manager. His brother was the assistant to Billy James, who ran a party house in Laurel Canyon. Ochs began to travel internationally to Chile and was in Chile as Allende was toppled. In 1975, he did an abrupt public persona change and changed his name to John Butler Train. He claimed he was a CIA operative. He became belligerent and a right-wing. They describe him as he suddenly became a right-wing thug. Now, keep in mind, this guy was this mild-mannered folk singer, peace, love, and joy guy. All of a sudden, he's a CIA operative. Something that other books have pointed out that maybe one day, if you're interested, I can do, is the way in which a lot of these musical people have split personalities. For example, see if I can remember, Nicki Minaj, Beyonce, I don't know enough about popular music. They all have alter egos. Okay. One of Ochs' biographers would later write that Phil/John actually believed he was a member of the CIA. Also, in the final months of his life, Ochs began compiling curious lists with entries that apparently reference U.S. biological warfare research, shellfish toxin, Fort Detrick, cobra venom, hollow silver dollars, New York Cornell Hospital. Many years before Ochs' metamorphosis, and an interesting bit of foreshadowing, psychological warfare operative George Estabrooks explained in his book Hypnotism how U.S. intelligence agencies had been working to create the perfect spy. We start with an excellent subject. We need a man or a woman who is highly intelligent and physically tough. Then we start to develop a case of multiple personality through hypnotism. In his normal waking state, which we call personality A or PA, this individual will become a rabid communist. He will join the party, follow the party line, make himself as objectionable as possible to the authorities. Note that he will be acting in good faith. He is a communist, or rather his PA is a communist and will behave as such. Then we develop personality B, PB, the secondary personality, the unconscious personality, although this is somewhat of a contradiction in terms. This personality is rabidly American and anti-communist. It has all the information possessed by PA, the beginning personality, whereas PA does not have this advantage. My super spy plays his role as a communist in his waking state, aggressively, consistently, fearlessly. But his PB is a loyal American, and PB has all the memories of PA. As a loyal American, he will not hesitate to divulge those memories. Easterbrook's never explained what would happen if the programming were to go haywire and personality B were to emerge and become the conscious personality. But my guess is that such a person would be considered a severe liability and would be treated accordingly. They might even find themselves swinging from the end of a rope. Phil Ochs was 35 at the time of his death. Okay, this is a good time to break and end part 2 and let you think about it. And I'll go check and make sure if I'm in YouTube Penitentiary yet. And I'll be back as soon as this downloads. Slancha.